everyone, this is your host Jawad at Kingdom of Dreams podcast. In today's conversation, I will have Jim Sorenson, who wrote the book The Art of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. We had a great chat about the book, the art, the film, the series, and everything else in terms of superheroes and comics. So here's my conversation.
Howdy.
Love your howdy.
Thank
I
you.
love your hat.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Apologies for being a little late. Just ran into some technical issues, but all good now.
No problem. I'm just going to turn up the volume so I can hear you a bit better.
Is this better?
Yeah, that's good. I just upped the volume on my end.
Great.
Am I coming
Where are
through
you
okay?
right now? Yeah,
I'm at
you're
home.
sounding great. As in, like, which part of the
My living room.
okay.
Yeah.
I was more so about like which state are you in America?
Oh,
In
New Mexico.
New Mexico. That's what I thought.
New Mexico. Yeah. Just
Yeah,
just next door
that's
to Texas. I got that vibe going on.
yeah. I mean, New Mexico is very similar in terms of culture and vibe to Texas. No, correct me if I'm wrong.
In some ways, yeah, it's a much bluer state. We've been Democratic for quite a while, so obviously not much to do with turtles, but we're the sort of the southwestern state that's Democratic, and that's where people in Texas who need an abortion are going to right now. So
Yeah. Got it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, man, for joining. Appreciate it. It's good to have you on the podcast. Just to kind of give you some context. I my teen years were defined by Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Probably the first show that I ever saw when I migrated to Canada, and seen the first two films, and then I lost all the films in between. I have no idea when they came out or how they were or how terrible or good they were. And then this new film that came out in the summer definitely excited me with its animation, with its characters, and with its just uh, humor, just the way it was back in the late 80s and early 90s. So, uh, really a huge fan. I loved the film. I went through your book, really enjoyed that as well. And just to kind of give people more perspective about who you are before we get into the book, uh, what's your journey in life has been, and what do you do? Are you an author, or is that sort of a side thing? What's Jim's story?
so these days I am primarily an author. I
Mm-hmm.
started writing. I got first published in 2007 with a Transformers book of animation models, and I was a big Transformers kiddo. You were saying that Turtles was one of the first ones that you glommed onto. For me, 1984, it was Transformers. I thought it was amazing. I loved the commercial. I loved the comic. I loved the TV show. And I wound up being really fascinated by some of the production artwork that went into making the cartoons, and incidentally the comics as well. They shared the same set of animation models, and I bought off eBay on the secondary market a comic book Bible, which had all the characters' bios and the designs, turnarounds, front and back for most of the characters and their robot and their vehicle or their animal modes. And I thought it was so cool, and I wanted to share it with the world. And a buddy of mine was the art director over at the Intrepid Museum in New York, which is the aircraft carrier, Sea Air Space Museum. And the two of us put together a pitch, and we were able to convince IDW to do a 200-page book of black and white animation models, which was, kind of a tough sell, but it was quite successful. It sold really well, and then we did a follow-up volume, and then we did a couple of books for the Transformers animated show that was contemporary at the time on Cartoon Network, and we did one for Transformers Prime. And I'd just been doing a ton of different art books, not just Transformers. I did some G.I. Joe ones. I did the art book for the Angry Birds movie that came out, and
Mm-hmm.
that was my first straight up movie art book that I did. And later on, I did some Transformers books that included the Transformers movies, although that wasn't the exclusive focus. So when my editor over at IDW Publishing asked me if I'd be interested in doing a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles art book, for the new film, I said, yeah, that sounds fantastic. And I got lucky because I agreed sort of sight unseen. I don't even think the trailer had dropped at that point. And when the trailer came out, I got to see, along with the rest of the world, what the art style looked like. I said, "Oh, okay, this is going to be a treat." And then when I actually got a chance to start talking to the people on the production side of things, it was pretty incredible because they really, so some projects are done, mainly to make a buck, and some projects are done because the people involved really, have some story to tell, have some vision
Mm.
that they want to share. And this was clearly in that latter category. Everybody that I spoke to, and they let me talk to everybody. I had great access. It was fantastic. But everybody that I was able to speak to was so excited to be working on it. Some of them had grown up with it. Some of them just, knew the brand because it was really big. But they were all quite animated, if you'll forgive the pun, by the desire to tell this deeply teenage story. And it shows in every aspect of the movie, especially the artwork. And that's why it's fun for me, as someone who mostly makes art books, to be able to showcase that. And not just their images, which are beautiful and gorgeous, and it's great to see those sort of production pieces come to life, on film and in the page, but also to hear them talk about what their process is and why they made certain choices and how they did it. And it was really gratifying on this one, especially because the editorial mandate was very much to put the people who created the art front and center. We were really good about crediting which pieces were from which artists, and we were able to get quotes and anecdotes from those artists and producers right next to their own work. And that's not something, every studio and every production company has their own philosophy about what they want their books to be and what the point of it is. And
Mhm.
this one was very artist focused. They're not always. Sometimes it's more corporate. There's an idea that some art is work for hire. And most of this art was probably work for hire. But when it's work for hire, you can assert corporate ownership and then not credit the artists if and
Yeah.
that's a choice. It wouldn't be my first choice as an author, but if that's the publisher's or the licensor's first choice, then you roll with that and you do the best product that you can. But in this case, I was really enthusiastically on board with most of the choices that came, from the licensors, from Paramount, and it was just a great project to work on. Sorry, that probably went in a million different directions.
No, no, no. That's great. There's no script or format to, so that's awesome. It's a really glad to hear that. I mean, as you were talking about Transformers and GI Joe, I remember, and when I got into TMNT back in the 1990s, 1990, I remember watching ads for GI Joe, and there was obviously a series at that time. I remember I was at Thundercats, and there was Thunderbirds, there was Transformers, there was Barbie, and all that era of that mid 80s to mid 90s was all those kind of shows. And what I found interesting about the film was, so I had no idea. I just saw, I think, one trailer or whatever the teaser was. And I don't think, or if they did, I probably wasn't paying attention. And I just saw it once. They didn't show, I think, Superfly, the villain, yeah, which is in the film, or they did, and I didn't catch on to it because in the original series, the first episode was Shredder, and then they showed. I don't know. Have you seen the original series? Just to kind of
Sure,
figure
sure. I
out.
mean,
Yeah.
I was at the tail end of that. Although the Turtle series that I really responded to was the 2003 Fox Kids series. The
Mm.
second, well, the third one they did, because they did the live action one from Saban
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Second cartoon that they did was kind of was mine, but you couldn't avoid the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon if you were a kid or a teenager in that time frame, and then you didn't want to. I mean, it was it was so it was so creative. It was clearly following in the tradition of like Masters of the Universe. That those kinds
Yeah,
of
yeah.
wacky characters and designs. But sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, no, I found that Shredder being in the original series, the first episode, if I remember correctly, it was episode 11 or 12 or maybe 13 when the character of Superfly came in. I remember that episode was called Enter the Fly. That was in the original series. So having seen that, I mean, when I first started watching the film, I was like, "Where's Shredder?" Right? But then the way they did, the way they did the characters and they changed some things too, how Splinter became Splinter. I mean, in this original series, it's a lot different, but which was fine. I mean, I wasn't too, turned off by it. But the way they developed Superfly and Ice Cube, how he pulled that off, I thought that was phenomenal. And then as the credits rolled, which I mean, the film has been out, so I'll just say it. I'm sure people have seen it by now. After the credits or halfway into the credits, you see Shredder. Like they kind of give introduction to Shredder in the post credits. Setting up the sequel or a bunch of other films and whatnot, which was fantastic. So I thought the artwork and the characters, and I wasn't too crazy in the trailer when I found out or when I heard that they were little kids playing teenagers, but when I saw the film, which is the way it should be because they're teenagers, it made perfect sense and it worked so well, and it was probably for me the original series and then the first film that came out where the Jim Henson Muppet Shop did all the puppeteer work. Uh, that and then this particular film in the TMNT world stand out very much. And yeah, that's just a little bit about what my context is. But in terms of the book and access that you had, obviously the person who was really behind this film was Seth Rogen. I mean, he's a big fan of the original series, as much as, probably yourself, me, and a whole millions of other people. And what was speaking to him like about in terms of the book that you worked on?
It was a real treat for me because he's a bona fide movie star, and I don't get to chat with them too often, but they had set up an interview with him, and it was just half an hour, and they had warned me ahead of time, like please don't go long because he's not going to cut you off, so you cut him off, at the half hour mark because he's got places to go. I say, yeah, fine, I can do that, and it just flowed from him. I prepared a list of questions and I barely had to use them. Because I'd give him half of a prompt, and before I could finish the prompt, he would be rolling with an anecdote. He was everything you'd expect. He was witty, he was insightful, but he also was deeply passionate about the project. He Yeah, I mean, you can and hopefully will read the interview in there because we didn't
Yeah,
have to
I
cut.
did. I did.
It wasn't. I mean, that's more or less how the conversation went. I think I had one or two other like really short questions that may have shown up elsewhere in the book, but it was just a real free flowing conversation. And if anything, we had in the editing process, I had to edit back in like my sentences because I didn't quite get to the end of them, and it was clear from context, but a conversation in writing has a different rhythm than a conversation that is spoken. So to the extent that we had to tweak it, that was what we had to do. But it was just a delight, especially because he knew what he was talking. It wasn't bullshitting. He
Yeah.
clearly was deeply interested in turtles and happy to be working on turtles and enthusiastic, and he gave great funny answers, and it's those sort of elements really level up the a book, and you can see how it's leveling up the film from what it could be. I mean, there have been 7 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies, theatrically, yeah, plus a couple on TV. So
Yeah.
and some of them are amazing, and some of them are less so. And this, to me, this genuinely was one of the amazing ones, and I feel like he's one of those voices that was always pushing to help, to whatever choices needed to be made, it was clear to me, even just from a half-hour conversation, that he's one of the ones who's pushing to make those choices the most interesting ones that they could be. Not the safe one, but the bold one that that might fail, but didn't. And isn't it wonderful that it didn't?
Yeah, no, his interview with you was great, and the reason I asked was, I mean, it's just basically for the audience who, who may not have read the book or who may want to read the book, just to kind of give them some context, which, which sort of leads me to my next question is one thing that you said, which is so spot on, and it's not just in this project. You can tell whether you're writing a book on your own, which nobody will read, or making whatever a movie or a TV series or independent short, whatever that is. You could tell the way a project comes out that it was started and carried through because of the love for that project versus just numbers, right? When it's just numbers, which is important, numbers are important because obviously it's a business at the end of the day. But when it's just numbers for the heck of just, making money, it more or less than the time it doesn't hit the mark. And I think, I mean, I was reading it the other day, the merchandise in TMNT hit over $1 billion. I mean,
I
that's
remember
insane.
I remember reading that. I remember looking at the box office numbers of the film, and they were fine.
Yeah.
I'm no expert there, but I looked at them and I said, "Oh, that looks like it's doing. It's not going to be the number one movie this year, but it looks like it's solid." And then I read an article in Forbes or Business Insider or something that said, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles merchandise hits $1 billion for the first time. And I'm like, okay, not first time ever, but the first time in recent years.
Yeah.
I said, oh, well, yes, that's part of it. I mean, my son, who's 10, he this was his first real exposure to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and he said, "Oh, can we get the toys?" I said, "Yeah, sure we can." So we got the four turtles, and then we wound up getting some of the classic ones. We got a Krang and a Shredder, so
Yeah.
they'd have some they could fight, but they're just
Yeah.
fun to fiddle with.
Yeah, no, it is. And the good thing about the merchandise making so much money is even if the film didn't do much profit, which I don't know if it did or not, it doesn't matter because they're going to make another film or two just because the merchandise did so much. I mean, even after their cut and, retail and all that stuff, whatever they're going to get, it's going to be a profitable thing, and that they will make another film which will generate more merchandise and whatnot. Um, what was the most difficult? I mean, you said you had access, and that's one thing in making films, whether you're writing a book or making a documentary. Um, Access is a huge thing, aside from telling a great story or writing a great book. What access you said you pretty much got all of them. Was there any particular one which was hard to get because of schedule or that you really wanted to get or it didn't work out?
No, I'd say I was able to talk to everybody I wanted to. It took a while to schedule the Seth interview, and it might have taken a while to schedule the interview with Jeff Rowe, who was the director.
Mm.
Although I had a second interview. I had two interviews with him because the first one was really great, but it was done very early he was one of the first people I spoke to. And I think it took a while to set up the second interview, but I really wanted to um, ask him some follow-up questions once I had a better sense as to what the movie was. And I'd spoken to so many other people because I could ask, frankly, better questions. The Jeff Rowe interview that's presented in the book is something of a Frankenstein. That was too, we may have alluded to that in the book. We may not. I mean, I'm not doing hard hitting journalism, so I don't feel too bad taking two interviews and smushing them together and cutting out a couple of quotes and putting them elsewhere in the book, because I feel like I'm accurately and honestly presenting his sentiment and his ideas. It's not a New York Times piece on Israel or anything,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's so that definitely happened. And I think it reads pretty through. And when I was conducting the second interview, I knew that was my plan, and I'd already pulled out some quite a few quotes from Jeff and used them elsewhere in the book. So I kind of knew uh, where I needed to add connective tissue and ask a question in a specific way so it would feel like a follow up to an earlier question, even if it wasn't. And
Yeah.
I told at the beginning that I was doing that, so it wasn't a surprise to them. I said, if I ask you a weird question, like that's why. And I think I think I had a question. I don't remember what it was, but there was a specific question that Paramount had said, please ask Jeff this. And I had to say, okay, I'm going to ask you a question, and it's one that the studio specifically requested. So I'm sorry if it breaks the flow of our conversation, but
No, no,
and
no.
it wasn't even a bad question or anything. It just, I mean, as an interviewer yourself, again, you know that there are certain conversational rhythms, and if you then interrupt with something that is obviously um, that you're verbatim reading some question that someone else had given you, it reads weird. Um, but the challenge wasn't access to people. The challenge with this one was getting access to the designs because we were working on the book while the movie was still in production. So
Mm,
we were, and I don't mean this in any kind of a negative way. We were an afterthought, as we should have been. The priority
yeah.
must always be to create a great movie, but I had a vision early on that we would maybe give each mutant, and there's 14 mutants in the book. There's the four turtles, and there's Splinter, and there's Superfly, and then eight more mutants. And I had thought that maybe we could give each mutant in the book their own chapter, or maybe a mini chapter, and they wound up getting a page each, which is sort of the minimum that you'd want to do them justice. But I would have loved to give them like 4 pages each, but they just didn't have that level of material created like it's not even like they weren't giving it to us. I don't even know if it necessarily existed. Um, so we wound up using the material that we had to craft the book. And very late in the process, when the book was all starting to come together, it would be more apparent where the gaps were. And filling those gaps could be an issue just because everyone, on the art side of the production of the movie was so busy trying to hit the deadlines of the movie, and here I am, the fly buzzing in the ear, saying, "Well, can you give me like an early design sketch, maybe something that got rejected?" And that's not their priority. So that was where the challenge came in. But there are a lot of people who were willing to step in and fill that gap. Yashar Kasai, who was the production director, and Ken Seki, who was the head of cinematography, were both people who were obviously very interested not just in making the movie, but in the fact that an art book was getting made. And they were always good for me to send them a direct message or an email and say, "Hey, does this exist?" And they would usually, on their lunch break, go ahead and shoot me a file that we'd have to go clear through legal and the studio to make
Yeah.
sure it was okay to use, because it didn't come from their art department. But then they mostly did clear, and then we could use them in the book. So that was more the kind of access challenges that we faced.
Sure. No, thanks for
And,
sharing that. And sorry, go
well,
ahead.
a lot of times, a lot of the books I've done are very retrospective. When I'm working on a cartoon from 1984, everything was made decades ago. When you're working on something that is currently being produced, and the challenges there is just finding it, because did people save it? It's a different set of challenges when you're working on something that hasn't come out yet.
100%. I mean, most of the books that have been coming out, and I've spoken to quite a few authors, James Mottram, who's done the Jurassic World and Jurassic Park trilogy books, and a bunch of others on different books, like Tennant. I mean, I have some of them here. Star Trek, your book, Prince of Egypt, and all this stuff. They don't have access to that artwork, which is very challenging, especially because a film like this, it came out in 2023. I'm guessing it probably started working on it in 2018, 2019. Roughly an animation project takes 4 to 5 years from conception to delivery. And even in the first few years, you're doing all these concepts work just of trying to figure out what the feel would be, what the characters would look like, what the artwork, the backdrop, all the city and everything would look like, and then you kind of kick into production. So, was there a particular artwork that didn't make it to the film, or a series of artwork that you really liked, that you thought should be in there? And if so, what would that be?
The piece that I wanted, and I want to say I fought for it because I thought the answer might be no, and I was emotionally prepared for that. So when they said no, I let it drop. But the one that I wanted to get in the book and didn't was, you mentioned it. It was that Shredder concept art. You just get a
Mm.
flash of what the Shredder silhouette basically looks like, and I kind of wanted just that, like not even necessarily production side of that, like just almost a still from the film to be in it. I had proposed that as the last page, like right before the end. So what wound up being this, I said, this is where I would put Shredder, and and I said, and look, our book's not coming out till, originally we were targeting
Yeah.
late August, but it still would have been about 2 or 3 weeks after the film was out, and it wound up coming out in October. So it's coming out around the same time as streaming and home video and stuff. So I said, we're not going to give away the surprise. Anybody who's picking up the art book, either has seen the movie
A
or at
hundred
the very least
percent.
has had every opportunity to see the movie. And they turned around and said, no, we don't want to do that. I said, okay, I understand. But that's the one that I thought would have really nice, literally bookended the project. Start at the beginning and end right at the end. Because I thought it would, I knew it would be a cool moment in the film. And I thought, we can pretty much capture that moment in the book, because it's just a still image. So much of the film is the motion, but that one wasn't. So you could really do it justice in print.
Yeah, and you're so right about that, that anybody who would pick up the book or even would know about the existence of the book has either seen the film or is planning on seeing it. And if they haven't seen it, they will more than likely watch the film first, then they'll pick up the book. It's kind of like how they made the film, right? They're nobody's gonna read it before they watch the film, anyways. Highly unlikely.
Although, having said that, I remember my mom, who's a big Star Wars fan,
Mhm.
OG Star Wars fan, being in a comic store, telling me the story of how she was in a comic store in like 1980 and like saw, oh, Star Wars, this is interesting, like right before Empire Strikes Back came out, and spoiling herself for the big reveal about Darth Vader being Luke's father because of a comic book adaptation. So it's not an unreasonable concern. I just think in this case, it probably would have been worth the risk.
Yeah, I
And
mean
obviously, the culture is different in 2023 versus 1980. I mean,
yeah,
it,
and Ninja Turtles, if you follow Ninja Turtles, you would know who Shredder is. If you've never seen Ninja Turtles and if they saw a silhouette, they'll be like, "What is this?" Like they wouldn't put the two together. But I guess I mean I know how how things work, like in studio and publishing houses. Like there's a lot of bureaucracy and there's too many people making decisions and they're trying to come up with the best decision possible. And they might be like kind of going seesaw. So I get that. And hey, if it was my film, I probably would have done the same thing. So no, completely understood. And I'm just speaking as a fan right now. And I'm gonna go off topic from the book. What before you start writing the book, or even right now, what it is that your line of work, has it also always been in creative side? If not, how did you transform into this world?
pun intended. Um, so before I was doing, and I started writing full time around maybe 2013 or so. And before that, it was freelance. So I had been doing consulting and data analytics. I went to school for mathematics, and I big fan of it, and I like that sort of puzzle solving. And my first real job. I taught English in Japan for a couple of years, but my first real job was doing consulting type work, and I did that for a few years, and then I transitioned to being in house over at Yahoo. Um,
Mm.
then I did that for a bit, and I did the same thing at an internet startup, and that was where I was when the first book came out. In fact, I remember signing a clause in when I was at the startups that was saying, well, if you make any patents or anything, we get a piece of that. And I remember specifically negotiating a clause that said, I have a book that's coming out that I've already contracted, so I want my writing career totally separate. You guys don't get a piece of that, and they were fine with it. That wasn't what the authorship clause in my contract was about. They were targeting engineers who were coming up with interesting bits of code. But
Right.
I do remember specifically negotiating that. And the the .com, the guy who had founded it also had founded a movie studio. So so he was somewhat interested in the writing side of things. So we had like scripts lying around in like a back room in the office. I remember oh well, what was that one with Robert Downey Jr. And Tom Cruise? Thunder something?
Tropic Thunder,
Tropic
one of my
Thunder.
favorite
Yeah,
films.
we had a script for that that was just floating around the office for years before the movie came out. And we didn't produce it. There was something that had been pitched to us, but or
Yeah,
to
yeah.
his
I mean,
production side.
Ben Stiller directed it, and DreamWorks ended up distributing it. So yeah, I mean that's
Yeah,
the
no,
thing in
the one that
Hollywood.
we did was Thank You for Smoking. That
Oh
was the one
right,
that
with Miles. Is it Miles? The guy was in Top Gun, the new Top Gun. I think so. The young guy. I'm just kind of curious now because I always mix up actors.
yeah, it's been a while since I've seen that one.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't him. It was Aaron Eckhart and Rob Lau, and it was 18 years ago. Is that long? Wow,
Yeah,
time flies.
time flies.
But uh, but yeah, no, actually, Tropic Thunder is an incredible film. I mean,
Oh yeah, that
yeah,
was fantastic. I don't know why we had the script floating around. I don't know if we passed on it or if we bid on it and we got outbid. I don't know what the deal was. I just remember there was like 4 or 5 copies of the script lying around, and then
yeah.
the movie said, "Oh, this is quite good."
What you said your was it the CEO of the startup? He founded a studio. What studio did he
It was
go on?
David Sachs. You can find him on Twitter now, talking about Ukraine mostly, but one of Elon Musk's friends. In fact, I used to when I did data analytics for the company, it was Genie.com. You know, he was on our board, so I'd be pitching to him, whatever our latest numbers were. But yeah, David Sachs was one of the producers on Thank You for Smoking.
Sachs as an SACKS.
SACKS, I think.
Yeah, he's an entrepreneur, investor, an internet technology firm, craft. He's a VC basically, a
Yeah.
venture capitalist. Um, so do you miss? Are you still part of that world, the mathematical and analytical part, or do
Not
you?
so much. I'm mostly full-time writing. I My wife got a job out in Albuquerque. That was I was in Los Angeles when we were doing all the consulting stuff and data analytics. Then my wife got a job in Albuquerque, and it was right around when my writing career was really kind of taking off. So it seemed like a good time to just transition out of that, rather than try and do remote work, which was harder in
Yeah,
2013. And then we had our first kid, so it made sense to have a full-time dad around because I can. My wife's a surgeon, so
oh, she's a
her
yeah,
schedule is very
yeah.
demanding, and when she's at work, she's really at work. Whereas if I'm writing something and then something comes up family wise, it's really easy for me to hit pause for the most part. So that was the stars kind of just aligned.
Makes sense. And Albuquerque is obviously, if you moved in 2013, that's where all the action happened with Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul.
Yeah, there was. I remember my brother was a big fan, and he said, "Oh, will you give me the Breaking Bad tour?" And I said, "Sure." So I did a little bit of research, and I was taking him around the house. And when we got to Walter White's house, there was an RV out front and a guy in the hazmat suit who was doing a more formal paid tour. But he was a good sport, and he let us take pictures with him. And my brother's like, "Wow!" I'm like, "Yeah, I did that. I meant to do that."
That's awesome. You haven't seen Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul?
Oh no, I saw it. It was great.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
I was a big fan of that. And then, if anything, I thought Better Call Saul was better.
I agree with you in a very weird way. I don't even know how to explain it because even though even though you can't have break Better Call Saul without Breaking Bad, I find you can't have Breaking Bad without Better Call Saul. It's just there was just something about the way that series was, and how they kind of tied it up all to the loose ends in Breaking Bad and the characters. I thought it was phenomenally done.
I thought Breaking Bad, I thought they were both really good, but I thought if Breaking Bad had a flaw, it was that it wanted to keep escalating. And I thought Better Call Saul kept its stories on a very human level, whereas Walter White winds up being larger than life, which is a very intentional choice. Um, it's not necessarily a choice I responded to as a viewer.
Yeah.
So I
That
liked how grounded Better Call
Better Call,
Saul
yeah.
was start to finish.
I think that makes sense, but I also think that again, this is just my point of view. With Walter White, his character was kind of shown like he kind of keeps, but you show his backstory about how he has been duped by his two friends, and now he wants to prove himself and he wants to keep going. That greed kind of kicks in, and he becomes larger than life. With Saul Goodman, he was always trying to just his whole thing was scamming just for the hell of it. Just whether it was like a watch or $10 or $100 or $1 million.
And I think you learn his character is largely defined by his relationship to his
With
brother, and that gave
yeah,
it a very sort of Greek
yeah,
tragedy quality to it because Chuck was never going to accept Jimmy. Chuck McGill was never going to accept Jimmy McGill as a lawyer. And if he was able to, Jimmy might have been able to be better. But because he couldn't, Jimmy wasn't. And it becomes this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that leaves one brother dead and one brother incarcerated. And it's kind of beautiful in how awful it is.
yeah. I mean, hats off to the people who made it. Everybody behind it. It was just such an amazing set of stories that they came up with. But going back to your your career and your work, what particular book are you working on right now that you're able to discuss? If not, what is it that you have finished that's coming out anytime soon?
I can't talk about what I'm working on right now, but I can talk about one that's going to be coming out. I think it's going to be April. It's and I'm one of several authors on it, but there's a the Transformers role playing game. The Enigma of Combination is coming out in April, and I got to do all of the lore for that. It's a role playing supplement, so it's all about the combiners in Transformers. And that was a lot of fun to get to work on. I put my Transformers stuff. I'm kind of known for doing deep dives, so I was able to for the real hardcore fans, I was able to put a couple of nods in there for things that they might be very surprised to see in print.
Mm,
That was a
got
lot of
it.
fun.
Awesome. Looking forward to that. Speaking of Transformers, I mean, your book came out in 2007. I think that was the year when the first live action film came out too by Michael Bay, with
Yep.
Shia LaBeouf and Megan Fox. And then since then, I mean, yeah, there has been, I don't even know how many, I'm guessing six or seven live action
Uh,
films.
yeah. So Michael Bay directed five, and then they did Bumblebee, and then just this year they came out with Rise of the Beast.
Rise of the
So they
Beast. So I
seven of
loved,
them.
yeah, so I loved the first one. I loved Bumblebee because it was kind of like an 80s vibe, kind of like E.T. It was very low budget, kind of like lower downscale as opposed to, Michael Bay directed films. Rise the Beast, I saw the trailer, it just looked way too it just didn't click with me. But then I was going to speak to the editors of the film when it came out on VOD, so I had to see it, and I was pleasantly surprised that it wasn't. It was again that was more of a grounded film, similar to Bumblebee. But I think from a Michael Bay standpoint, the first and maybe the second one had some elements, and then for me, it kind of went off the radar. I can't distinguish between three, four, and five. I have no idea which one is which. Because it
Fair
just
enough.
became repetitive for me. As a fan, you are of Transformers, way more than I ever could be. What's your sort of experience has been watching these films? Has it been like a treat for you one after the other, or not so much?
I loved the 2007 film when it came out. I got to see a screening early at a Transformers convention, so that was That was a lot of fun and a great environment. And I really appreciated the sort of Spielbergian touches. He
Yeah,
was
yeah,
an executive producer on the film, and you could really see his sense of wonder, and it helped to ground the film. You were talking about grounding the films. Having that human perspective. The sense that these guys really are big and
yeah.
magical and alien. I thought that did it really well. I think the second one, The Revenge of the Fallen, suffered because of the writers' strike, and we're just coming out of the 2023 writers' strike. But
Mm.
the that film was done um, without a script for big parts of it. They just
Oh,
went
I didn't
ahead
know
and
that.
kept. Yeah, no, and yeah, and they did some fixing it in post, and you it I understand. Like I often come at things from the point of view of the writer, and I'm very interested in story structure and character arcs. But I can grok that that's not how Michael Bay approaches storytelling. To him, I always get the sense that the plot is a vehicle to provide a set of experiences. More so than a more writer focused film who's more interested in examining the intricacies of how characters interplay and have a clever plot. Michael Bay doesn't seem to me to be very interested in exploring those kind of things, and which is maybe why he felt he could go ahead and shoot parts of the movie without scripts and without writers on
Yeah.
hand. But but it makes it harder for me as a writer to connect with the second film. And then you could I could go through each one in turn. I feel like it
It's
wouldn't necessarily
repetitive.
be the most
Yeah.
interesting exercise. The third one had Leonard Nimoy in it as the villain. That was as a Star Trek guy, that was kind of a treat. And then he was the villain in the old 1986 animated Transformers movie as well. So kind of a weird.
Ah,
Yeah, he was Galvatron. He was the voice of Galvatron back in the 80s. They had Orson Welles as Planet Unicron. It was a star-studded. Nobody cared at the time, but it was a
yeah.
star-studded cast. So it was fun for him to come back. And then Shia that was Shia's last movie. And then the 4 and 5, you introduced your new human protagonist, and um, so the story kind of goes in. I don't want to say the story goes in different directions. I'm rambling, but what I really appreciate about the later Transformers movies from the Michael Bay quintet is how many ideas he puts into every film. I call it like the idea shotgun. He loads up 20 or 30 ideas and fires them at the walls and sees what sticks in some way. And again, as a writer who gets to write for Transformers, it can be really interesting for me to sort of like pick out, two or three from this film and say, let's maybe explore some of those ideas in greater depth. In the fifth film, there was concept art produced for the HMS Victory as a transformer. So a giant sailing ship of the line turning into a big wood, kind of Pirates of the Caribbean robot. And I got to put that in one of my books. And it's just so creative and interesting. And it's not the kind of thing that the Transformers mainline cartoons are going to produce. And Michael Bay being able to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to bring some of those ideas to life is spectacular, even if I'm simultaneously not necessarily connecting with the movies on a script level, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. And then
Yeah.
Bumblebee is just a delight, to see that smaller scale story. That one felt like one of the comics come to life, which I also appreciated. But it's nice that the franchise and Turtles has this too, is so big that it can accommodate so many different styles, so many different ideas. I had a lot of fun putting together the history of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for this book. I mean, and it was brief. I don't remember, 2 or 3 thousand words maybe. I didn't have a ton of space to play with to go through a very big franchise. But it's amazing how Turtles started off as a lark, as a parody of Frank Miller, and perfectly threaded the needle by hitting a home run in every media that it was able to get into. I mean, the toys were phenomenally good toys. The cartoon was a phenomenally good cartoon, and then the Jim Henson movie. I mean, the idea that this comic would just hit it out of the park. It's amazing that it was able to do that. And now there's so many different interpretations. You can
Yeah.
read the IDW comics version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There have been 4 different Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoons on TV. This is not even the first Turtles animated movie theatrically. They had one, I want to say 2007. They had they had TMNT, which was where the Karai Shredder was the villain, and it was Leo versus Wrath. And that one was fun for me because a buddy of mine did. I was living in LA at the time. A buddy of mine did the sound design on that movie, so I got to go to the premiere randomly, and that was a lot of fun to do. But that there are so many different. There's 2 different. There's the Michael Bay live action movies. The 2 of those,
Yeah.
and the Henson ones. So and then the TMNT, and that's 6, and then this is 7. So 7 films. With 4 different kind of design philosophies between the 7 films so far. It's wonderful. Like I said, my Turtles cartoon was the 2003 cartoon, which was very rooted, at least initially, in the comics. I remember a buddy of mine saying, "You got to watch the new Turtles cartoon." I said, "Oh, really? Why?" He said, "Well, they do the Leo versus Shredder where the Shredder's head comes off." I'm like, "In the cartoon on Fox Kids?" They're like, "Yeah." And sure enough, I watch it. The 2 of them, lightning flashes, they leap up, the silhouettes lands, Shredder's head pops off. It's like, okay, that's straight out of the original, Eastman and Laird comics. I was impressed that they did that. So
Yeah.
I I like franchises that are big enough to incorporate different visions, where it doesn't have to all just be, focused on one thing.
Right. No, that makes
Turtles,
sense. And 100%. With the thing with Michael Bay, that you were talking about the wonderment of the wonder part of Transformers. I remember when that first sequence of Shia LaBeouf sees the truck changing into transforming into Optimus Prime. It reminded me of that moment when Alan Grant in Jurassic Park, they see, the dinosaur for the first time. It was literally like that kind of comparison that I drew. And with Michael Bay, I think he can make some amazing films besides the whole action element. For me, the 3 of his best work, I don't know if you have seen The 13th Hour,
I have
which
not.
is
No.
it's probably his best film. It's about the Benghazi attack.
Yeah.
And then the most recent one, Ambulance, which is a really great movie. I won't give it away. It's an amazing film. And The Rock, the one that came out in the mid
The,
90s.
the Rock was kind of my introduction to him.
Yeah, I think it was an introduction a lot because before that he had made Bad Boys, which kind of put him on the map, but I think Rock just took him to another level, and then he made the Bad Boys sequel. Um, but having said all that, I think what's cool about um all these things that you're talking about is that you like you said, you can take it into different directions. I think before, I mean, you look at Barbie, the movie that just came out this year, did what, over $1 billion at the box office. I
Number
think
one
it did
movie
a
of the year.
yeah. It's not just about picking up a franchise and retelling it, or picking up a brand or an IP and just putting it out there, but it's not just, I think, also, it's obviously story is a huge thing. I'm a huge believer in that too. Everything starts and ends with story. But I think giving people the freedom to rotate and move things around, whether it's characters or certain things, just to kind of give it a little fresh approach. I know there will be some fans that might be upset about it, but I think people are looking for fresh approaches, and to kind of take, instead of expecting something, what they're expecting, but expecting the unexpected. And I think with TMNT, like I said, when I didn't see Shredder, yeah, I was kind of like pulled back. But the way they did the job on Superfly, it just made me forget about Shredder until the credits.
Hmm.
And I think that's what's fantastic about, like you said, like just taking it in a different direction. But you obviously have to do it properly and really well so people can connect to it.
Well, I mean, with any project, right? The execution
Yeah,
matters. It matters a
yeah.
lot. You can have the best idea in the world if it's not executed
Executed. Yeah,
well,
100%.
it's going to catch on. And I think something like Barbie, not only were the filmmakers given um, permission to really stretch their wings creatively and take the story in, in a direction that is not what we've seen before with licensed toy movies. I mean, we've seen things like Transformers, where you just take the fantasy very seriously, or something like Toy Story, where you say, oh well, let's let toys come to life. And this Barbie obviously just went in a totally different direction of you know feminism exploration and toxic masculinity, and it was clear that that was the story they wanted to tell, and Barbie, as it turns out, was a great vehicle to do that. And it's wonderful that Mattel felt comfortable enough to allow that to happen, with their dolls. Uh, that I really enjoyed seeing that. We did the whole family dress up in pink thing. That was a fun experience to do as well. But um,
It's interesting you mentioned. It's interesting you mentioned that. Sorry to interrupt you. It's interesting
no,
you mentioned that about the whole feminism thing and all that. And it's funny, I guess it's perception. When I started watching the film, that's the vibe that I got, that it was going to be just this one-dimensional film. But as soon as Ken's character kind of kicked in and you start seeing his back end, I found it became a different film. And then it kind of went like this, like it just kind of like a seesaw or ping pong game where there's questions about feminism and then there's questions about what it is to being a man and so on and so forth. And then that's
it
by the end
involves
of the film.
horses.
Yeah, by the end of the film, I really appreciated that because one thing that not just in this topic and anything, it is to me I'm a filmmaker myself. So when I tell stories, I'm very much attracted to what, instead of saying that this is the it, why is this it and why is the other way the way it is? So just kind of letting the audience figure out. But this one, Greta really did a great job in doing it in such a meticulous and a comical way where you laugh at a scene, but at the same time you feel something really deep down.
I really couldn't agree more. I mean, it's a movie that has a point of view and is interested in exploring it, but without being preachy
Yeah,
about it. It
that's the
does let
word.
you
Yeah.
come to your own conclusions. And yeah, I mean, Ken Ken is hilarious and so
Oh,
much
he
fun to
made the
watch.
film. I think he made the film. I don't think it was Barbie. I think for me at least, he made the film the way it came out as a whole. He was just phenomenal in it. What's his name? I forget his name.
Ryan Gosling.
Yes, thank you. He just did a remarkable job in it. I mean, it was amazing. It was amazing. But yeah, no, this has been great, Jim. Sorry we're going off topic, but this is what this all podcast is. We
So
discuss
good.
different things. And really enjoyed chatting with you. Would love to talk to you in future, possibly about your past work or
Yeah,
upcoming
sure.
work. Send us a link some of the books that you've written in on Transformers because I would love to sort of dive into it too, and maybe we can find something and do another episode.
Yeah, it'd be wonderful. I can talk about Transformers till the cows come home. So
I'm sure you can, and I would love to learn a lot from you because my Transformers knowledge is limited to the film and maybe tiny bit to the original series, nothing significant. I saw, what was it, Thundercats or whichever it was with Thunderbirds, one of those two I saw growing up a lot, not Transformers. That's I think, which I think came after Transformers. It was kind of like a, yeah, yeah, great, yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, man. Appreciate it,
you're very welcome.
and
Thank you.
take care.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. and do come back for another episode. Until then, have a great day.